No, my little connoisseurs of freebies and trojans, I'll say it straight out. I do not justify piracy, and I'm strictly against this phenomenon. The last time I downloaded an unlicensed copy of a video game was sometime back in my school days. Since then, I've bought hundreds of games, both on Steam and GOG. Piracy harms the industry and, among other things, forces developers to apply DRM methods to protect their products. If we decode it, digital rights management, ways of controlling and protecting one's product. If you remember, back in childhood days, some games required you to insert a disc so they could read certain information from it. Those who had the internet connection back then would download certain crackers to avoid those inconveniences. That in particular was one of the ways to protect against piracy. Speaking of the modern day, some developers insert certain systems into video games that sometimes lead to technical downsides. Bethesda recently got into such a backlash when they implemented the Nuva protection into Doom Eternal, which led to unstable performance. Due to negative feedback, they eventually removed this DRM, now it's present exclusively for multiplayer mode. Another way to counter piracy is to make live service games, or to require constant internet connection. This is the route taken, for example, by Blizzard Entertainment with Diablo, or the developers of Payday 3, which played a cruel joke on them. So piracy in itself has an extremely negative impact on the industry as a whole and causes discomfort to both the people who create the product and those who consume it. However, recently there have been a few examples showing that the world isn't strictly black and white, so you can look at things from several angles. I'm talking specifically about the situation with Rockstar games. Not a long time ago, one YouTuber discovered that on Steam they are selling, attention, a cracked copy of the game Manhunt. Once again, on an official digital distribution platform, a gigantic corporation is selling a cracked version of its own game. The same thing happened with the second Max Payne. How did they notice it? After a quick crack of GTA Vice City, Rockstar clearly got pissed off at the pirates, so they implemented a whole minefield of glitches, bugs and inconveniences that make completing the game, if not impossible, then extremely difficult. The funniest part is that these anti-piracy measures were aimed at the cracked versions, but they were felt by honest buyers, because the crackers calmly bypassed those minefields. You can check out the video for the details. I'll leave a link in the description. So once again, the cracked pirate version plays better and with fewer problems than the official licensed copy on Steam, which itself is also a cracked version, only with glitches intentionally turned on. But why are they distributing that version instead of a truly clean one? The video doesn't cover that part, but my guess is that Rockstar lost the original copy with the source code. So in order to sell at least some version, they downloaded the pirated one and passed it off as their own. Of course, as always, the human factor of laziness played its part, which is why people uncovered such deception. On one hand, this unpleasant situation happened because of the fight against piracy, but on the other, we wouldn't even be able to play old Rockstar games today because they literally forgot to save them. That's basically the main topic of the video, so-called preservation, meaning the preservation of video games. Relatively recently, a study came out, discovering that around 87% of older video games are considered lost. We are talking about licensed physical copies. The research was carried out by the Video Game History Foundation in partnership with the Software Preservation Network. They created a catalog of titles up until 2010, after which, in their opinion, digital distribution was becoming more popular. They concluded that 87% of classic video games have no digital release and are considered endangered due to their low numbers. Among the famous examples they mention is the very first game of the Yakuza series, which was released in 2006 for the PlayStation 2. Yes, later the remake Kiwami came out, but obtaining a licensed copy of the original today is extremely difficult. Here the co-founder of the Video Games History Foundation, calssic, says the following, and I quote: "For accessing nearly 9 in 10 classic games, there are few options. Seek out and maintain vintage collectible games and hardware, travel across the country to visit a library, or piracy." The situation is made even more complicated by the fact that copyright protection laws, especially digital ones, and in this case it's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, largely prohibit the distribution of protected video games, meaning there are practically no legal ways to create additional copies of old games. As you can see, this is exactly where piracy enters the stage. For a more detailed look into the research, I'll leave a link in the description. Some might ask, and why would anyone want to play ancient video games if there are remasters or newer, better titles? Updated versions don't always turn out well. Quite often, they're even more problematic. And besides, people, myself included, simply want to play older games. We're not going to take away the freedom of choice, are we? That's all with the theory, and now let me give you a few personal examples. Take at least Warcraft III. As you know, in 2020 the so-called remaster Warcraft III Reforged came out, and its quality is questionable at best, both aesthetically and technically, with a bunch of bugs and glitches. At first, users couldn't even install the original versions of Warcraft 3 at all, so they had to painfully tinker with the launcher. Later they did eventually patch the game, and now inside Reforged you have to toggle the classic mode option, meaning you still have to download the remaster, which isn't such a critical issue, more of a just inconvenience. But if you want to play the true original, it's simply easier to go the route that you know. The next video games were less lucky. This is true for The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth 2. That game was released under the umbrella of Electronic Arts, but nowadays you simply won't find it anywhere in digital form. Why did this happen? If you're making a product based on a famous franchise, you have to purchase a license that is granted for a specific period of time. Eventually, EA didn't want to do that, so they simply pretended this wonderful strategy game never existed. Therefore, either buy dubious keys or physical discs at a very interesting price, or welcome to the torrents. And the point here isn't even about the money. Let's suppose they do manage to deliver that sacred disc to me from eBay or Amazon, which isn't always possible either, but how am I going to use it? I'll have to go somewhere and look for either a person or a store that has the appropriate equipment just to copy it onto a flash drive. As you understand yourself, it's much more convenient just to download it and maybe risk catching a miner than to torture yourself. The same goes for the wonderful Armies of Exigo. The last time I played it was from a disc back in 2000s, so I honestly wouldn't mind paying a certain amount of money to play it again today. People have been asking on the GOG forums for ages to port it into digital, but so far I haven't seen any news about this actually happening. Among even more famous titles, you won't be able to legally play, at least digitally on PC, the legendary GoldenEye, which was released on the Nintendo 64 back in 1997. The original concept was that this video game would be bought because of the popularity of the movie series, but it happened the other way around. In essence, GoldenEye made speedrunning as a phenomenon, and overall, back then the shooter became insanely popular, so you'd think it would be re-released more often than Skyrim. However, for a long time this simply did not happen, until happiness finally arrived not that long ago in the form of a remaster for Switch and Xbox. Still, it's far from guaranteed that we'll ever see it on PC. Once again, it's surprising for me that this hasn't been done already after so many years. Generally speaking, when it comes to classic Nintendo products, things aren't great. A huge numbers of old games have already been practically lost, even for their own consoles. Another no less famous Japanese game shares a similar fate, the second part of Silent Hill. As it turned out, the developers lost the original code, so the remake had to be made entirely from scratch. Yes, that's still a way out of the situation, however, some longtime fans of the series still consider the original to be better than the remake, even though personally I liked the updated version. But again, while it is a solution, it's only a partial one. Personally, I'd still like to play the original. By the way, the fourth part can be bought on GOG. As you can see, even quite well-known video games can be forgotten and lost over time. Although it would seem that the video game industry, which is essentially the spearhead of digital technologies, an industry which at one point practically single-handedly fueled the development of computer technologies, shouldn't be be having any issues with distribution and archiving. Obviously, piracy is not a real solution to this problem, it's only a temporary loophole for some people. Unfortunately, I didn't find yearly piracy info to give a more specific, fact-based conclusion, to be able to say that in 2025 this phenomenon has decreased. Naturally, pirates aren't going to publish those numbers for obvious reasons. Still, there are some snippet-sized pieces of interesting info, especially concerning the average age of pirates. So, among people aged 59 to 60, the percentage of dishonest gamers is only 15%. Whereas among the younger generation under 19 years old, these numbers are far higher, a whole 40%. Clearly, young people don't do this out of good life, but because of lack of money. I think we've all been there. Still, based on my own impressions, piracy has become less convenient than buying video games. Sounds pretty strange. After all, how can buying something be more convenient than getting it for free? But digital platforms like Steam or GOG have created entire ecosystems with constant discounts and algorithmic game recommendations, like you see on YouTube. Just as some of you stumbled on this video, that's exactly how someone else might get recommended an interesting game. Right now, plenty of games that are just a few years old are very cheap. You spend a couple of bucks and in return, you get a comfortable interface, cloud safe storage, achievements, and even fan-made content in the next tab. If you pirate, you can waste a ton of time just trying to find a specific version. Then you have to download it somewhere and there's a high chance you'll catch some kind of virus. And what if your game gets updated? Then you have to go through the entire process all over again. And on top of that, GOG actually optimizes certain old video games. So not every pirate version of a classic title will work as well as the licensed one. So once again, I'm against piracy. It harms both the creators of video games and their consumers. That said, the phenomenon of digital products disappearing is very real. Honestly, I would happily overpay for the opportunity to play certain games legally, if such an option ever appears. To me personally, that is a much better route than pirating, even despite the fact that for some games there is simply no other way to play them.